Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, it is week 10 of the 2024 college football season, and we've got a Saturday main slate of 12 games on the DraftKings slate. And also, FanDuel, they're probably coming out with their slate a little bit later. They'll have main slate as well. But we are here to break down the Saturday main slate for college football DFS. We're going to take a look at all 12 games on the DraftKings slate, tell you what you can expect from each game, as well as who you need to be targeting and not targeting for your DFS lineups in order to win some money on DraftKings and FanDuel this Saturday. Now, if you have not already, make sure you check out our midweek college football content. We do have a video for the Wednesday night slate that is up. So if you're playing on the Wednesday night slate, check that out. I can't promise that I'm going to get to all these midweek slates because I am starting my busy season. I'm currently coaching two sports at the high school that I teach and work at, coaching girls flag football as well as varsity boys basketball. So probably not going to have as much time to get to all the midweek slates, but I'm going to get to what I can get to, and I wouldn't put it out there if I didn't do the research and feel good about the content that I was putting out to you guys. So make sure you go check that out if you have not already, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. That way you can be with us for the rest of the college football season. We'll have all the main slates covered, all the night slates covered, as well as some of the midweek slates. And also college basketball starts on Monday. Y'all know we love college basketball over here, so we're going to have plenty of content for that as well. So if you're subscribed, you'll be able to be with us for that. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We got 12 games to break down, and I don't really want to take any more time wasting. So let's go ahead and get started. So we've reached the point in the season where DraftKings is just kind of doing what they want with these slates. Like, I'm going to be honest, I don't know how these first two games got on the slates. I'm not complaining, but there's plenty of Power 5 matchups that they left off the slate. So it's kind of interesting. And also, I got to be honest, this week as a whole is kind of a weak-ish week in college football. There's a lot of the best teams in the country are not in action. On this slate in particular, no Notre Dame, no Texas, no Alabama. So, we're really missing a lot of the great teams and great offenses that we like targeting in college football DFS. So, we're really going to have to learn some new names here in this episode. We're going to learn some new faces, learn some new names. So, game number one, this is one of the ones that I'm surprised they put on the slate, but I'm not complaining because I definitely think there's angles to attack this game, is Air Force at Army. First off, thank you for your service, everybody involved in this game. Army is 22.5-point favorites with a game total of 41.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 32-10 in favor of Army. And look, Air Force is just not that good. Army also has the best rush defense in the country right now. Army hasn't played anybody, so that also inflates that stat. But this is just not a good stylistic matchup for Air Force. Air Force, they're still running their variation of the Service Academy triple option. They don't necessarily always run it out of the flex bone like Army and Navy do, but they are still running triple option. So this is a bad matchup going up against the best rushing defense in the country. This is a team that has not had a lot of success passing the ball this season. Their starting quarterback recently has been Quentin Hayes, but he got hurt, did not play last week against Colorado State. And so the starter from the start of the season, John Busha, came back in and played against Colorado State, put up 18 fantasy points, which isn't bad. It's his best performance of the season. The problem is the Army's a pretty good defense. Army's a better defense than Colorado State. And $4,500, you're really going to be depending on his legs to score you a lot of fantasy points. And, anytime you can get a starting quarterback for $4,500 on DraftKings, I think you have to consider him, but I think he's far from the slate's best play at quarterback. I see this being a game where he ends with no touchdowns, probably 200 total yards, and probably like 9 fantasy points, and that's just not going to cut it at $4,500. At the running back spot, we always got to talk about the Service Academy is a little bit different because they have their B-backs and their A-backs. The B-backs are usually the dive on the triple option. The A-backs are usually the pitch man on the triple option. And for Air Force, Dylan Carson is their starting B-back. He is the guy that's going to lead the team in carries. He's going to be getting all those dives on the triple option. Now, typically that leads to a lot of volume and not a lot of explosive plays, and that kind of lends itself out when you look at Dylan Carson's stat lines. Here's the issue with Dylan Carson. Now, he has not scored a rushing touchdown on the season, 37 carries and still no touchdowns. But the problem is they're not very likely to score one in this one. Again, Army, one of the best rush defenses in the country. Air Force only implied to score 10 points. This is not the best spot to play a guy like Dylan Carson. Now, at the wide receiver position, is their starting A-back, Cade Harris. He also plays a little bit in the slot when they look to spread out the formations a little bit. He's their best offensive playmaker in general, in my opinion. He's the most likely to break off a big play. He's only $4,100. I think that if you're looking for value at the wide receiver position and you want to be a little bit different, he's a way to do so because, like I said, he is a pretty good big play threat. He's going to catch the ball. He's going to run the ball. There's worse options out there, but I also think there's better options out there. Again, this team's only implied to score 10 points. You can totally fade him. Now, a team that I don't want to fade, though, is Army. So Bryson Daly, is their starting quarterback, and he has just been absolutely incredible. 38 fantasy points in his last 5 games, and he's done it mostly on the ground. In a game against ECU where they were kind of pushed a little bit, he ran the ball 31 times, 5 touchdowns, almost 60 DraftKings points, which is insane. And that's just the kind of upside that he brings because of how much he's going to be rushing the football in this triple option offense. I think he is probably the top quarterback play on the slate, in my opinion. If you were just to ask me, hey, who's going to be the top scoring quarterback on the slate, I would tell you that it's going to be Bryson Daly. And here's the thing with Bryson Daly, though, and this is a topic that gets talked about in DFS a lot, is the topic of stacking. You're absolutely not going to want to stack Bryson Daly because he is doing most of the damage with his legs. He's not a prolific passer. The high he's had for pass attempts in a season has been 10. So you're just getting like 0 passing volume. You can really ignore their wide receivers. And the thing that does is when you're not stacking a quarterback with its wide receiver is first, it kind of, let me think the best way to word this. It kind of makes a lineup like making a parlay and betting and making it one more leg. Like when you're able to stack a quarterback with 1 or 2 wide receivers and you know that the quarterback's going to be targeting that wide receiver heavily, then you need less things to go right for your lineup to have a lot of success. If you're just playing Bryson Daly as a one-off play, then I need to find another receiver play that is totally uncorrelated, and it's like, adding another leg to my parlay, making another bet on another player on another team to have success. And kind of make it just a little bit harder to cash. So I do think that is something that has to be considered, is the fact that he is not a stackable quarterback. And I generally prefer to stack as much as possible, but I really like to prefer stacking with pocket passers. And a guy like Bryson Daly, that's just not his game. So I do think Daly is the top quarterback play on the slate, but do keep in mind that it comes with the caveat that you're not going to play him stacked, and you are going to have to find another wide receiver to be successful. At the running back spot, Kanye Udo is their starting B-back. He is their best rusher. Just when you look at the season in totality, that's not quarterback Bryson Daly. He's going to see the most volume, no doubt. Again, it's going to be mostly on the dive in the triple option. And then Short and Howard are their 2 starting A-backs. Short is the guy that definitely sees more of the work. He is an explosive player. He's also their second leading receiver. I don't think he's a bad option. And then also Samari Howard is the other starting A-back. Now, one thing you also have to keep in mind when these service academies play each other is they're used to defending the triple option. They're not going to catch each other by surprise. So these games do tend to be a little bit more lower scoring than they normally do. So I'm probably just going to keep my Army exposure focused on quarterback Bryson Daly. At the receiver position, Reynolds is their number 1 wide receiver, but like I said, the passing volume is so low that you just don't really need to worry about an Army wide receiver. Next up, another game that I don't know how it got on this slate, Memphis heading to the Alamodome to take on Texas San Antonio. The spread is Memphis by 7.5 points with a game total of 60.5, meaning the implied total is about 34-27 in favor of Memphis. And this is pretty interesting. Seth Hennigan has only had 3 games over 3 times value for his salary. And really 3 times value is like the bar for, being viable. You want all your players to at least hit 3 times value, get you 180 points. That's probably going to be it for certainly a min cash, if not more, right? So with Hennigan, he doesn't have a track record of hitting value for that salary. In fact, he hasn't really had a ceiling game this season. He hasn't had a game over 30 fantasy points. So he hasn't had a game over 4 times value for his salary. But if there were a game for him to do so, it would be against Texas San Antonio. UTSA gives up 293 passing yards per game, which is in the bottom 10 of the FBS. So if there's ever a time for Seth Hennigan to do it, now would be the time. I'm hoping that people would look at his salary and look at his game log and just kind of turn away. But I'm going to be playing him because I think that this is an opportunity for a Seth Hennigan ceiling game. At the running back spot, with all the injuries Michigan has in their backfield, Mario Anderson Jr. is a certified workhorse. He had 32 carries against my Charlotte 49ers last week, turned it into 28.6 fantasy points. This coming off the back of a 53 fantasy point performance against North Texas. He's an absolute workhorse back, but like I said, I think how you beat this UTSA team is through the air. UTSA only gives up 98 rushing yards per game, which ranks 12th in all the FBS. So I do think that while Anderson certainly has the better game log than his teammate Hennigan, I think that the matchup dictates that Hennigan's a little bit of a better play. And then at the wide receiver position, Memphis is a really easy team to stack. The only downside is they're a little expensive. Rock Taylor is very clearly their wide receiver 1. He has been the most targeted receiver all season long. He had 10 targets last week against Charlotte. He's their best receiver. Blankham C is number 2. He's their second most targeted receiver. His targets tend to be a little less lucrative than Thomas. Thomas tends to get a little bit more downfield shots, tends to get a little more work in the red zone, whereas Blankham C works a little bit more underneath. But both those two guys are going to be heavily targeted. I think they would be absolute smash plays if they were about 5,500, but they're sitting there in the 6K range. I think that the only way I'm getting to them is as stacking partners with Seth Hennigan. If you're looking to get creative with your stacking partners, Kobe Drake and Anthony Lanphier are the other two guys that really play in this system. Lanphier is the tight end. They had Caden Prescorn at tight end a few years ago, so they do like to use their tight end. But really, those 4 guys, it's super concentrated. Those are the guys that you're going to want to target from this Memphis passing attack. On the UTSA side, I kind of like Owen McCown this week. Not because I think he's all that good, not because I think that UTSA is all that good. I think they're honestly quite bad. But the matchup and the price tag are really good for McCown. He is coming off of, 3 straight games of 23.8 fantasy points or more. That's about 4x value for his salary. That's really, really good. And Memphis ranks 87th in the nation in passing yards allowed. And UTSA is a team that likes to throw it. They rank 20th in the nation in pass rate. So I think that this is a really, you can really look at Owen McCown as kind of a cheap quarterback play, in my opinion. With them being so high in pass rate, they don't really run the ball a whole lot. Rob Henry Jr. is their leader in the backfield. Pretty significant advantage over Kavorian Barnes. Memphis is a much better run defense than pass defense, though. They only give up 124 rushing yards per game. I don't think this is the best spot to play a UTSA running back. And then at the wide receiver position, Devin McQuinn, their number 1 receiver, has been out. He missed their last game. TBD if he's going to play in this one. In the game he was out, both Houston Thomas and Chris Carpenter had monster games. But when you look at their game logs, they're super inconsistent. They really hadn't done a whole lot this season up until that game. So I would only have interest in them if McQuinn is out. And both of them hit over 23 fantasy points, by the way. I would only have interest in them if McQuinn was out. Willie McCoy has been a super consistent option all season long. He's the guy that I would certainly consider more. You can play him whether McQuinn is in or out. And really the status of McQuinn, I think McQuinn's in. I think he's a great play as well. He's very clearly this team's top receiver. Next up, game number 3, we've got Ole Miss taking on Arkansas. Ole Miss is 7-point favorites with a game total of 53.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 30 to 23 in favor of the Ole Miss Rebels. For Ole Miss, they have became a tough team to target in DFS because they're just overpriced, quite frankly. Jackson Dart has not had a single viable DFS performance in SEC play. At a salary of $9,300, you're really going to want 28 DraftKings points for him to, pay off that salary, if not more. And he hasn't gone over 21. So I just don't really feel the need to play him. The good news is if you're looking to talk yourself into Jackson Dart, Arkansas is relatively stronger against the run than the pass. They're a worse pass defense than a rush defense. So maybe Dart could get you 300 yards. Maybe he'd get you a few touchdowns, but it's hard for me to talk myself into him getting the 30-plus DraftKings points that he would need to break a slate at that price tag. At the running back spot, Henry Parrish Jr. is starting to look like the guy. Last week he had 15 carries to Ulysses Bentley's 5. But Arkansas is a pretty good run defense, so I don't think this is necessarily a spot that I want to go out of my way to target an Ole Miss running back. At the wide receiver spot, Trey Harris is Ole Miss's alpha receiver. 60 catches already on the season, and he's really good. And really, some of those games he's left early too, so it could have been like 70. But anyway, he did miss their last game against Oklahoma. TBD if he's going to play in this one. You're definitely going to want to check the status. But the problem is that last week when he was out, there wasn't like one guy that stepped up and gave us a big-time performance. They really spread the ball around. Caden Prescorn, the tight end, and Jordan Watkins, Caden Lee, and Daquan Wright all ended up over 50 receiving yards in that game. And Juice Wells was also involved in that game. What's interesting is that we had traditionally seen when Harris had left games before that Lee and Wells were the main 2 beneficiaries, but that really wasn't the case with just how much they spread the ball around against Oklahoma. So, this is, again, a situation where if Harris plays, I think he's probably one of the top wide receiver plays on the slate just because of the volume that he commands. If he doesn't play, though, I don't think that makes any of these other guys just like an instant auto start because they showed the tendency of spreading the ball around so much last week. On the Arkansas side, Taywin Green showed us his true upside last week. That's like the Taywin Green that we hope we see every game. He is an elite runner of the football. He was really good passing. He got to 300 yards, 48 DraftKings points against Mississippi State. The problem now, though, is that Ole Miss is a much better defense than Mississippi State. I don't think the Ole Miss defense is that good, but they're better than Mississippi State. The good news for Taylon Green is that Ole Miss does rank as the third best rush defense in the nation in terms of yards per game allowed. So this is a team that you're going to want to target through the air. And Green showed the ability last week that he can put up a lot of fantasy points through the air. So I don't think he's necessarily the best quarterback play on the slate, but I do think he's a solid play. He's probably going to make my player pool just because he does have that immense upside as a dual threat. At the running back position, Jaquindon Jackson missed last week. He had been their workhorse running back, and what you saw was a split between Rashad Dubinion and Braylon Russell. Both of them were great. Dubinion put up 21 fantasy points on 11 carries. Russell put up 22 fantasy points on 16 carries. Dubinion was slightly more involved in the passing game. If Jackson is out, I think they're both in play because even though it's a 50-50 split, they're absurdly cheap and they showed to have success last week. I think between the two of them, I would prefer Dubinion. He has a better track record, as well as the fact that he was used more in the passing game. And I do think the Ole Miss is going to be able to shut down the run in this one. Last week, with that ceiling Taylon Green game, came a ceiling game for Arkansas's two tight ends. I'd been talking about it all season long with Luke Haas, and he finally had it when he wasn't on the DraftKings slate. Isn't that just like perfect dramatic irony, right? Like I've been talking about, hey, keep playing Luke Haas. He's going to have a ceiling game. He's going to have a ceiling game. He's going to have a ceiling game. He did last year. And he did have a ceiling game. It just wasn't when he was on the DraftKings slate because DraftKings didn't pick that game. $3,300. I don't mind going back to the well there now that we've seen him do it. Andreas Paskey is the backup tight end who had 16.9 fantasy points in that game against Mississippi State. I think that's kind of fool's gold. Probably not going back to that. Haas has a much more locked in every down role. But at the wide receiver position, we continue to talk about Andrew Armstrong. He is their number one alpha wide receiver. A little bit of an off game against Mississippi State because he did not find the end zone thanks to all those tight ends scoring. But he's a really solid player, really solid play, $6,600. I do think that he's going to make my player pool just because he does command that much volume, and he's a great stacking partner with Taylon Green. All right, coming up next, game number 4, we got Duke heading to South Florida to take on the Miami Hurricanes. Miami is 21.5-point favorites with a game total of 54.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 38-17 in favor of Miami. For Duke, we've talked about Malik Murphy before here on the show. He's not the best quarterback in the world. The situation around him is not the best like it was when he was at Texas. And honestly, he had his best game against SMU last week, 25.7 DraftKings points, threw for 295 yards, 3 touchdowns, is yet to throw for 300 passing yards on a season, which is a number we really care about because on DraftKings, that gives you the 3-point bonus. He's shown 0 rushing upside, negative rushing yards on the season. So really, if you're going to play Murphy, you really want him to get the 300 yards. You really want him to get you that bonus because he's not going to give you any other easy, cheap fantasy points via his legs, right? To me, he is in play for me as a game stack play. I think that Miami, we've seen them get caught in these shootout games where these teams jump on them early, like Virginia Tech and Cal, right? And, if Duke does that, then Murphy's probably going to have a pretty good fantasy day. So I think if you're looking to stack this game up, I think Murphy makes a lot of sense. I'm probably not playing him otherwise, though. At the running back spot, Star Thomas has been great with Jaquez Moore being out. If Moore is back in, I have 0 interest in either of them because it will be a 50-50 split. But if Star Thomas is getting all the work, I do think that puts him in play, even though Miami is probably going to be able to shut down the run pretty well in this one. At the wide receiver spot, Malik Murphy will be a really easy quarterback to stack because he really only throws to 2 guys, Jordan Moore and Eli Pankel. Last game, Jordan Moore did end up with 11.8 fantasy points thanks to finding the end zone. Really would have been a bad day if he didn't score that touchdown. Eli Pankel was their guy, though. 14 targets in that game, 11 catches, 138 yards, and a touchdown, 35.8 DraftKings points, which was a season high significantly for Pankel. Those 2 guys are the only 2 that he throws to. So if you're looking to stack Murphy, pick more based off the long-term track record or Pankel based off the recent success. And then Keyshawn Brown is another guy that got some run last game, 4 catches, 63 yards, and a touchdown. I do think that's worth looking into as well at a salary of only $3,300. Super condensed passing offense for Duke. That does make them stackable. And even though they're not the best on play papers in the world as a team going up against a good defense in Miami, only implied to score 17 points, I can talk myself into playing like a Murphy, Pankel, Moore stack and stacking this game up with Miami guys on the other side. So speaking of the Miami guys on the other side, Cam Ward is priced up at $10,800. He had his first dud game of the season against FSU. It was really saved by the fact that they caught a touchdown. He caught a touchdown in the 4th quarter, which begs the question, I really feel like the Miami coaching staff is going out of their way to try to give Cam Ward Heisman moments. I think that's what they were going for when they threw him a touchdown in the fourth quarter up 16 against their rival in a situation where if Florida State had been more aware, they could have just totally laid him out on the route. Like if they wanted to be dirty and they were putting Cam Ward in harm's way to do that play. So if you're in the line of thinking it as me that Miami wants to win Cam Ward the Heisman Trophy, then you're probably in the line of thinking that he's going to have a pretty good game in this one. And Miami's implied 38 points. It's one of the highest team totals on the slate. He'd been absolutely outstanding before the FSU game, every game over 32 DraftKings points. So I really do think he's a really solid play. And I'm following the narrative that they want to get him the Heisman Trophy, and that's going to lead to increased production for him in this game. At running back, it is in a true 50-50 split between Martinez and Fletcher. Last week, because FSU's run defense is bad, both of them worked out. I don't think you can rely on that on a weekly basis, though. So I just have no interest in playing two guys that are in a 50-50 split. Like, if I were to play one, it would be Fletcher because he's only $4,000 on DraftKings. I don't know why he's that much cheaper than Martinez. At the wide receiver spot, Xavier Restrepo has been Ward's guy all season long, but Florida State played this really soft, too deep zone coverage where they were just really saying, hey, you're not going to beat us deep. And it really kind of prevented Xavier Restrepo from breaking off any big plays, really prevented him from getting a whole lot of volume. And so he just had a bad game against FSU. I'm willing to throw that one out the window and go back to him here on this one. I do think long-term he is absolutely the guy you want in this Miami receiving room. Isaiah Horton was the guy who took over kind of as the volume king against Florida State. 8 targets, caught 6-7 for 65 yards. He's been really good lately. And he's probably the second receiver that you want. Jacoby George and Samuel Brown are both still guys that have significant roles in this offense, and they're way too cheap. I don't mind them as lesser-owned, cheaper stacking partners with Cam Ward here in this game. All right, that's going to do it for the first 4 games. Let's take a quick little breather, and then let's go over the next set. Now, a quick reminder, if you do want more information from me, there are places you can get it. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have for me if you reach out on Twitter. Anything DFS lineup related, whatever. I know I record these for the main slate on Tuesday night, so a lot can change in between Tuesday night and Saturday morning. So if you want to know updated opinions or anything like that, don't be afraid to reach out on Twitter. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Fantasy Corner Discord is a community of a lot of really smart, really good people who play DFS for a lot of different sports. College football is one of them. College basketball season, which starting up soon, is another big one in the Fantasy Corner Discord. So if you're looking for people to talk DFS with, talk strategy, talk lineups, talk plays with, it's absolutely a great place to go. And, we have a blast in there just sweating it out every night together. So if you're looking for people to talk DFS with, that is the place to go. Also, if you want to know who actually makes my DFS lineups for every single college football DFS slate, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. I profile all my core plays in there for every single slate, including the midweek slates. And, I can't just promise that you can put those in your lineups and win thousands of dollars. It's not that easy. Just anyone who says it is lying. What I can promise is that you get well thought out, well-researched information from somebody who understands the X's and O's of college football and understands the game theory of DFS and can help you get better at college football DFS. All right, next game up on the list. We got Minnesota taking on Illinois. Minnesota is 3-point favorites with a game total of 45.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 24-21 in favor of the Golden Gophers. On the Minnesota side, they've gotten some price jumps from last week. Max Brosmer was $5,000. Big game against Maryland, who's an awful defense. Now he's priced up at $6,000. Look, he's not going up against Maryland anymore, and he's $1,000 more. So he's probably just a pass for me, if I'm being honest. At the running back position, I do love Darius Taylor. He's a workhorse running back. He averages about 5 targets a game, so he gets usage in the passing game. Just super consistent option. We have seen running backs run all over this Illinois team. Darius Taylor is one of the top running back plays on the slate, in my opinion. At the wide receiver spot, Minnesota is a very easy team to stack because they only throw to 2 guys. So if you're looking to play Brosmer, I could kind of actually talk myself into Brosmer because when you're stacking, you really want guarantees that the guys that you're playing at the wide receiver position are going to have volume so that you know that they're correlated plays with the quarterback. And because of how condensed the Minnesota passing attack is, I think I might be talking myself into Brosmer here. Daniel Jackson is the alpha wide receiver one, targeted 12 times against Maryland, scored twice in that game, 35.7 DraftKings points. He was the guy you had to have on the Saturday main slate last week because he was very popular for good reason because Maryland's defense is awful and his volume is incredible. And if you didn't have him, you were very much facing an uphill battle to cash in your lineup. In college football DFS, there's chalk every single slate, guys that are just super highly owned, right? Because they set up on paper as good plays. Usually that's when they end up being chalk. Well, Daniel Jackson was chalk last week, but he was good chalk. Fading good chalk in college football DFS can get you beat. He's gotten a price jump here on this slate, though. He's $5,800. I think I'm probably only playing him in stacking opportunities because of how much now his price tag has increased. The other receiver that they throw to is Elijah Spencer, who had 7 targets in that game against Maryland, also caught 2 scores, 27.9 DraftKings points from him. And, that makes the two of them combine for 19 of 33 targets in that game. That's almost a 2/3 target share between two guys. So, yeah, you're going to want to really focus your efforts in this Minnesota passing attack on Jackson and Spencer. And I do think that this passing attack, the more that I think about it, is in play for me because of how condensed it is. Now, on the Illinois side, this is just not a great matchup. Minnesota is a team that is going to look to slow the game down. They are also a pretty solid defensive team. Luke Altmaier is only $4,500. He has a little bit of rushing upside, but just not in this game. Like we've seen him go up against good defenses, and it just be a mix of good to or mediocre to okay, I guess you could say. Against Penn State, 6 DraftKings points. Against Michigan, 18 DraftKings points. Against Oregon, 4 DraftKings points. He's going to be somewhere between there. And I'm just not interested at 5,500. At the running back spot, what is interesting is that Aiden Laffery, however you say it, Aiden Laffery. I'm just going to go back to my first pronunciation. Aiden Laffery was their leading rusher last week against Oregon, 12 carries, 69 yards. He did out-carry the previous starter, Josh McCray, who was starting in place of an injured Caden Fegan. So Laffery at a salary of $3,000. Anytime you can guarantee you're going to get double-digit carries out of a guy at $3,000, I think they got to make your player pool. Even though I don't anticipate him to have a ton of success, that's just a really good price tag. At the wide receiver spot, this is another offense that only throws to 2 guys. They pretty much only throw to Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin. So like I said, even though Minnesota's defense is not one that I want to go out of my way to target, who's going to be scoring for Illinois. And in fact, even though this game environment is generally not good, with a game total of 45.5 points, I'd be pretty inclined to make bets on who's going to score those 45.5 points. Whereas a lot of these other games, all these offenses are so spread out that they're more unpredictable. These are 2 predictable offenses. So, if this game does shoot out, then who's going to be doing all the scoring. Next up, we have the game of the day, Ohio State taking on Penn State, which is interesting because I did see that both College Game Day and Fox's Big Noon Saturday are going to Penn State for this game. I've always wondered what it would look like when both those, pregame shows go to the same place. Is Pat McAfee's kicking contest going to be going right into the set of Big Noon Saturday? I don't know. It'd be interesting to watch. So anyway, what we've got in this one, Ohio State is 3.5-point favorites with a game total of 45.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 25-21 in favor of Ohio State. And look, I know some Ohio State fans that are very much concerned after last week because they now have some injuries on the offensive line and the backups did not look good. They did not look good as an offense against Nebraska. Will Howard has been a great play for the last month and a half or so, but I think I'm going to pass going up against this Penn State defense with backup offensive linemen. I just don't have any faith that he's going to have time to throw and then is going to have success when he does throw, or is going to have enough rushing upside to get me points that way. So $8,100 just a little rich for my blood with the situation that he is in right now. Speaking of which, the Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, we've been monitoring this committee all season long. They were a dead split 50-50 in carries last week. They're going up against the best rush defense they've seen all year. Hard pass for me on both those guys. At the wide receiver position, we talked about how the 2 guys that you want in this receiving core have predictable profiles. And I could make myself an argument into either one of them working out on this slate. Jeremiah Smith is a super talented deep threat wide receiver that all he needs is one bomb to pay off his price tag. And, in a game where your offensive line is probably going to struggle, why not take some shots downfield and throw to Jeremiah Smith? I could see an argument for him getting increased volume that way. Emeka Egbuka is the short and intermediate receiver who, catches kind of, less average depth of target passes than Jeremiah Smith. And so I could talk myself into Egbuka by saying, hey, what if they're just looking to get rid of the ball quick? They just give Egbuka a lot of short stuff. I could make the argument for both of those guys, but I don't think I'm super interested in it. I think there's better plays from a points per dollar basis on the rest of the slate. But like I said, I do think because of these 2 guys' talent, because of the narratives in which we've seen them play this season, I do think you can talk yourself into them more so than some other wide receivers on this slate. For Penn State, Drew Aller is very questionable for this game. He did not finish the Wisconsin game. Have no idea what his status is going to be for this one. If he does sit, it's Bo Pribula who's going to start. He's okay. He's more of a runner than Aller. He's kind of been waiting his turn behind Aller for 2 years now. I don't think he's the worst play in the world, but I don't think he's the best either. At the running back spot, Singleton and Allen, this is another committee that we've talked about all season long. They were a dead split 50-50. Last week. They're a little more palatable to play on DraftKings than Henderson and Judkins, though, because they're cheaper. And also because Nick Singleton is a guy who, gets a lot of usage in the passing game. He's also quite likely to break off long runs. So I kind of understand playing Singleton. And then I also kind of understand Katron Allen because he has a knack for scoring touchdowns. So I kind of get playing these committee guys much more so than the Ohio State committee guys, just because of the way that they score their fantasy points and where they profile as players makes a lot more sense for where they're priced at, as opposed to where Ohio State just has two expensive running backs in a 50-50 split. At the wide receiver position, Bo Pribula being the starter would probably make me have more interest in Tyler Warren because A, if you're a backup quarterback, you feed the ball to your best weapons. That's what you should do. And B, Tyler Warren plays as a Wildcat quarterback quite a lot. Why would they not use the Wildcat more if they don't have their real quarterback out there? That being said, I think he's too expensive. I really just talked myself into Tyler Warren, and then I look at the price tag and I'm like, you know what? No, 7,100. He needs 21 DraftKings points to hit value. That's too much. So I'm probably out. But like I said, I could definitely talk myself into a situation in which his usage is very good in this game. Next up, we have got Florida heading to, well, I shouldn't say heading to. This game's at a neutral site. It is Florida versus Georgia, a.k.a. the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Georgia is 16.5-point favorites with a game total of 52.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 34-18 in favor of the Dogs. On the Florida side, they're starting DJ Lagway at quarterback now that Graham Mertz is hurt. He's very cheap on DraftKings, but how can you watch that Georgia defense against Texas and be like, you know what? I'm going to start quarterbacks in DraftKings against this Georgia defense. No, that's just not how it works. Like, sorry, this Georgia defense, they've gotten healthy. They've had time to heal up. They're mean. They're nasty. They're really fast. They're really good. I have no interest in playing anybody going up against this Georgia defense for any time in the near future. At the running back spot, Montrell Johnson Jr. was their guy. He's been banged up. Jaden Ball got the start last game, 22 carries, 106 yards, 5 touchdowns against Kentucky, 43 DraftKings points. If Johnson's out, then Ball's going to see that workload again. But is that workload going to mean anything against this Georgia defense? Probably not. At the wide receiver position, there's one guy that can win against Georgia. It's going to be Eugene Wilson III for Florida. But he didn't look all that great in the 2 games that Lagway has played, 8.5 and 5 DraftKings points in the 2 games where Lagway has played a majority of the action. So it's hard to really talk yourself into him, even though he has been a volume king in this Florida offense. Elijah Badger has been the guy who's had a lot more success in the 2 Lagway starts. Excuse me, I had to yawn there. 3 catches, 148 yards against Kentucky. But still, against this Georgia defense, I just don't have any interest. I do have slight interest in the Georgia offense. Carson Beck, I still think is too expensive for what he is. He's kind of like what we talked about with I can't remember which quarterback it was earlier, but he is a pocket passer. He needs to get you 300 yards. He needs to get you multiple touchdowns in order to hit value. And at a salary of $7,900, it's just that much more difficult of a path to hit value because he needs 24 DraftKings points to hit value, whereas some of these other pocket passers need less. So I just don't really like it as a situation. I'm probably going to be avoiding playing Carson Beck, but I do think you can play other pieces of this offense, like Trevor Etienne, who has been great with Georgia having, some banged up and some injuries in the backfield. He's been great. 19 DraftKings points in 3 straight, over 30 DraftKings points in 2 of those last 3. Usage in the passing game as well, 15 total catches in those last 3 games. I think Etienne's an absolute smash play in this one. Florida gives up 181 rushing yards per game. And so you got to figure, like, if Etienne's the main guy and they're giving up 181, you give him about 75% of that. That's about 140 rushing yards. He gets a touchdown. That's 23 DraftKings points. We're not even factoring in his usage in the passing game. I think this is a great spot for Trevor Etienne. At the wide receiver position, Georgia continues to be super unpredictable. They don't really have one dominant wide receiver, but they are starting to condense it just a little bit around 3 guys. Arian Smith, Dylan Bell, and Dominic Lovett are the 3 guys who are playing the most snaps and seeing the most targets. If you're looking to play a Georgia receiver, those would be the 3 that I would be choosing from. But I really think I'm going to be focusing my Georgia exposure on running back Trevor Etienne. Next up, we have Arizona taking on UCF. UCF is currently 6.5-point favorites. Why? I have no idea. Vegas loves this UCF team, and I can't figure out why. They were double-digit favorites against Colorado, got whomped. They were favored against BYU last week, got whomped. I don't understand it. The game total in this game, though, is 55.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 31-25 in favor of UCF. For Arizona, the UCF defense is not all that great. They give up 141 rushing yards a game and 269 passing yards a game. To me, that bodes well for playing Noah Fafita, who has only had two, even remotely viable DraftKings games this season. In the opener, almost 36 fantasy points against New Mexico. Last time out, 27.6 fantasy points against West Virginia. Those have been his only two noteworthy games. But they were against bad pass defenses, and this is a bad pass defense. So I think that there's an argument to be made that Fafita is in play here in this one. The only downside is he's back up to $8,300, and that's kind of expensive. You're really going to need him to probably throw for 3 or 4 touchdowns in order to hit value. At the running back spot, Kweli Conley is the workhorse back. He does see a ton of usage in the passing game as well. Hasn't had a whole lot of success as of late, but like I said, UCF's not a good defense in either way. I don't think this is a bad spot for Conley at 6,400. But my favorite play on the Arizona team, and the only Arizona receiver you even really need to consider, the only one worth considering, I really worded that poorly there. The only Arizona receiver worth considering is Teteroa McMillan, who is just a machine in terms of how often he gets targeted with the football. We have seen him score 67, 27, 26, and 39 DraftKings points so far this season. Huge performances. Probably the number one wide receiver on the slate. Definitely stackable with Noah Fafita. Definitely playable as a one-off play as well, because I do think there are other cheaper plays out there that you can use to get to play Teteroa McMillan as a one-off wide receiver. On the UCF side, we don't even know who they're going to be starting at quarterback. So last game out, it was Ja'Curry Brown, and he got pulled about 3/4 in against BYU because he was just not effective. This is a guy who, kind of hangs his hat on his running ability. And in that game, 6 carries, 9 yards. It's not great. KJ Jefferson started the season for them. It wouldn't shock me if they go back to him. EJ Colson started one game against Cincinnati for him, didn't even last a quarter, did not look good. They're probably not going back to him. But Dylan Risk is the guy who finished the game against BYU. He did throw a touchdown. He did run for 31 yards as well. Look, if we get word that Risk is starting, he's only 4,500. And when you got a starting quarterback at 4,500, you got to consider it, especially when they're in a Gus Malzahn offense that has historically had a ton of success for fantasy quarterbacks because they use the quarterback as a rusher. They play no huddle. They're generally pretty good on offense. If Risk gets the start, I think he's instantly one of the best value plays on the entire slate. At the running back position, I think RJ Harvey is one of the top plays on the slate, regardless of price tag, which is good because he's expensive, $9,300. Arizona does give up 163 rushing yards per game. And if you're UCF and you're really struggling to the quarterback spot, why would you not just give the ball to this guy 30 times? That's what I would do. Make it easy for your quarterback. Get the running game going. Make them load the box. Make them adjust to this run game. And I think the Harvey's in a great spot to do that. I think he's got a ton of upside from a DFS perspective. Over 30 DraftKings points in both of his last 2. Really solid play, in my opinion, is RJ Harvey. And with all the doubts at the wide receiver spot, or all the doubts at the quarterback spot, I don't think you have to play a wide receiver for UCF, but it is worth noting the Ohio transfer, Jacoby Jones, had a huge game against BYU. 6 catches, 116 yards, 26.6 DraftKings points in that game. He was the one that was targeted by Risk the most. So maybe you could have a really cheap Risk and Jones stack. I don't think you have to, though, because I think this UCF offense does really want to run the football and even just run with their quarterback. So I don't think you really have to worry about that. Anyway, that's going to do it for our second block of games. Let's take a quick breather, and then we'll close things out. Now, before we continue, just quick reminder, please hit the like button if this video has helped you out in any way. It helps me out a ton when you guys do that, and I really do appreciate it when you guys do. If you're listening on audio, you can rate and review. That helps me out a ton. It's just the way the algorithm works. YouTube sees more value in my content when there are likes and comments on the video. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments as well, by the way. But basically, it just kind of helps the video have a bigger footprint, show up in searches, helps more people find the videos, helps grow the community, which we do love doing here. So let's go ahead and continue with the last 4 games. First up, we've got Kansas State heading to Houston. Kansas State's 13.5-point favorites with a game total of 46.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 30-17 in favor of the Wildcats. Now, here's the problem is that playing against Houston has just been so bad this year, not because Houston's good, not because they're even like all that great defensively, like they're just okay, but they just turn games into slogs. They play at a super slow tempo, that they're super conservative. They run the ball a lot, and they just make these games just ugly. They don't really give up a whole lot of big plays either. So it makes it hard to really feel confident about all these Kansas State guys, even though they are implied for 30 points in the game. Avery Johnson has been great this season, like just great. His last 4 games, he's had, 2 of them over 29 fantasy points. He does it with his arm as well as his legs. He's really good. He's really athletic. I think he's at a very reasonable price tag at $8,000 as well. But the concern for me is Houston turning this game into just a muck. So I think this is either going to go really well or really poorly for Avery Johnson. I don't really see there being a whole lot of in between, but I'm going to be playing him because of the off chance that it does go really well, because he does have that legitimately insane ceiling. At the running back spot, DJ Giddens is the certified workhorse for Kansas State. He's by far their best running back. He's probably one of their best overall football players. Against Kansas, he got a little unlucky in that he didn't score, and it kind of snapped his streak of 24 DraftKings point performances, which was at 3 before that game. He's a really solid play. He's a supreme workhorse. And if Kansas State gets up early in this game, I could see them leaning on Giddens and just trying to get out of Houston as quick as possible and keep that clock moving. At the wide receiver position, I don't think you have to stack Avery Johnson because he is such a good runner of the football, and they're not going to have a super high amount of passing volume in this game. But Jace Brown is the wide receiver 1. He's continued to be that since the start of the season. I think he's a gross underprice at $4,200. I'd be willing to play him at $5,000. I think at $4,200, I think he's playable both as a stacking partner and as a one-off value play. And then I'm also going to continue to bang the drum for Garrett Oakley, who scored his touchdowns in back-to-back games now. Now, neither of those performances have been huge, but he clearly has a role in the red zone in his offense. We're starting to see him play more and more. $3,500, he scores that touchdown. He's like instantly going to hit you value. So I do not mind him as a play at $3,500 also. The Houston offense has been one that, if we're being honest, you could have just put a big red X through the entire season and you probably wouldn't have lost any money by not playing Houston so far this season. Zion Chris is now the starter ahead of Donovan Smith, which is a surprise considering that Smith has been the starter for a little over 2 years now. And Zion Chris, coming over from, I believe it was Louisiana, wasn't all that great there. But he is more of a runner than a thrower. He's only $4,700. So, if this game does shoot out, it's probably going to be because of Chris. And $4,700 for a guy who's primarily a runner is not a bad proposition. He did have 25 fantasy points in that game against TCU earlier this year. So clearly he has some upside. $4,700 is worth a look. Like, this slate has some really, really cheap quarterbacks that if you want to roll the dice on, definitely give you a lot of flexibility in the rest of your lineups. And I would include Chris in that group. Now, there is a new workhorse in the backfield for Houston. It is running back Rashawn Stanford, 16 carries last week against Utah. Now, granted, it didn't turn into a whole lot, 7.2 fantasy points, but that's Utah. Utah's a really good defense. If this usage continues for Stanford, he is just way too cheap at $3,500. But I wouldn't fault you if you just wanted to wait and see, because this Houston backfield has been an insane committee for the last 2 seasons, and they're not implied to score a whole lot of points. The matchup isn't all that great. So if you want to believe in the recent usage, I think Stanford's a great play. But if you want to wait and see, I can't fault you for that either. At the wide receiver spot, with Chris being primarily a runner, it's really hard to target these receivers. But the 3 starters are Manjack, Muse, and Johnson, with Malik Carr at tight end. If you want to stack Zion Chris, knock yourself out. I wouldn't be playing these guys as one-off plays. Next up, we have Texas Tech heading to Ames, Iowa to take on the Iowa State Cyclones. Iowa State is currently 14.5-point favorites with a game total of 56.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 35-21 in favor of Iowa State. For Texas Tech, Baron Morton left last week early with an injury. He is apparently expected to be good to go for this Iowa State game, but this is a guy who gets hurt a lot. So I'm a little concerned about him getting re-injured. Will Hammond did come in and play well in relief of him. I thought he did have a costly turnover, but I thought he played pretty well for the most part. He is mobile. If we get word that Morton is out, I think Hammond is a great play. But the guy from this Texas Tech offense that I'm the most interested in is running back Taj Brooks. He is one of the top running back plays on the slate, in my opinion. The workload that this guy gets is just utterly insane. He's played 7 games and has gotten 179 carries. That's just an insane average. Like, it's well over 20 per game. And he's well over 20 DraftKings points per game. So just love this guy as a DraftKings play. If you're Texas Tech too, think about it from a coaching perspective. Your quarterback has a bum shoulder. Why not hand the ball off 30 times to Taj Brooks? And oh, by the way, Iowa State, they play this defense where they play 3 high safeties. If you've never seen it, you should check it out. It's a really innovative concept. And so there's one less guy in the box for Taj Brooks. So I really do love the idea of playing Taj Brooks at $8,200 on this slate. At the wide receiver spot, Texas Tech is super condensed. They really only throw to 3 guys. Caleb Douglas had 13 targets last week against TCU, led the team. That's back-to-back games of 9 catches, back-to-back games of 26 DraftKings points or more for Caleb Douglas. He's been great recently. He's way too cheap at $4,800. He's going to be very popular on this slate. Josh Kelly was the second most targeted wide receiver. He had 8 targets in that game against TCU. Just didn't really turn into a whole lot. He's been kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? He's due for some regression. He hasn't scored a touchdown in 4 games. He's still getting super consistent volume. $6,200 is a great price tag to pay for him. I'm kind of willing to play Kelly here at less ownership than Douglas and hope that Kelly does see some touchdown regression. And then Coy Eakin is the third wide receiver who plays nearly every down. He had 7 targets against TCU. Those 3 guys are all in play to me. They're all very viable stacking options. They're all very viable one-off plays as well. Now on the Iowa State side, I feel like we've said this about Iowa State before, but their guys are just way too cheap for them to have an implied total of 31 points. And this Texas Tech defense is not great. Rocco Becht, $6,500, so you only need about 19 DraftKings points for him to hit value, and he's done that in 3 of his last 5. In fact, 4 of the last 7. 4 of the 7 on the season, I guess, technically. He's had performances of 25, 21, 20.8, 36. So an insanely high ceiling of 36 for a guy who's priced at $6,500. I like Rocco Becht a lot on this slate. I think, he's going to be kind of a forgotten man on this slate because I think a lot of people are going to pay down for the super cheap quarterbacks or pay up for the super expensive quarterbacks, and he's kind of caught right in the middle of that. I think this is a great spot for Rocco Becht. I think if you're playing cash DFS, I think he's probably the cash quarterback this week because he does have such a high floor and such a high ceiling at such a reasonable price tag. At the running back spot, it's been committee central for Iowa State. And the unfortunate news for us is that Carson Hansen had really looking to take over the lead role, had 15 carries against Baylor, 20 against West Virginia, had 9 in the first half against UCF, and then gets hurt. And we don't know if he's going to play in this one or not. If he plays, I think he continues to be the lead guy. If he is out, it'll be some kind of 50-50 split between Jalen Jackson and Abu Sama. That's what it was after Hansen left last game early. I would be inclined to have both those guys in my player pool because Sama is just a big play guy. Jackson's a guy that we've seen get a big workload early in the season, so I think both of them do have some upside. There's certainly a low floor there, but if Hansen is out, I think Jackson and Sama both have a decent amount of upside at $3,500 and $3,400. If Hansen's in, I'm playing him at $41. At the wide receiver spot for them, this is another super condensed offense. And when you have a team that's implied 35 points like Iowa State and you have a super condensed passing offense, you got to target it, y'all. Jaden Higgins, excuse me. The other one's Jalen. Just wait a second. There is a Jalen, I promise. Jaden Higgins, 13 targets against UCF, turned it into 17.8 DraftKings points. He's been over 16 DraftKings points in every single game so far this season. He's just an absolute smash play. Jalen Noel was targeted more against UCF. He had 15 targets in that game, caught 8 of them for 153 yards, 26.1 DraftKings points in that game. So he's been a little more erratic with his scoring than Higgins, but he's shown an equal amount of upside. I don't mind a Becht double stack of Becht, Higgins, and Noel because pretty much those 2 guys combine for such a high target share that you know that if Becht is going to have success, then it's going to be Higgins and Noel having a lot of success as well. Next game up, we've got Indiana taking on Michigan State. I got to be honest, there was a game that you wanted to cross off. This isn't a bad nominee, in my opinion. Indiana's 7.5-point favorites with a game total of 51.5 points, which feels high to me, meaning the implied total is about 29-22 in favor of the Hoosiers. For Indiana, Curtis Rourke missed last game. He's questionable for this one. No idea if he goes or not. Taven Jackson got the start, and he put up 15 DraftKings points, which isn't terrible, but it isn't great either. I'm not interested in Jackson if he starts. What I do think it does mainly for us, if Jackson starts, though, it makes the offense significantly more run-heavy. Last week when Jackson started against Washington, Justice Ellison had 29 carries. And really, this is a backfield that was still a committee because Tyson Lawton also had 12 carries in that game. So you saw 41 carries go to those 2 guys. So I think Ellison in specific is actually in just a smash spot if Taven Jackson continues to be the starter because we're going to see him continue to carry the rock big time. And Michigan State allows 145 rushing yards per game. So you definitely have an opportunity where I think that it's a really good spot for Ellison if Jackson's out. At the wide receiver spot for Indiana, Elijah Surratt is still their wide receiver one. But like I said, the passing volume is going to decrease if it's Taven Jackson. So I'm really only interested in playing the Indiana receivers if Rourke is active. But even if he is, after Surratt, it's just super spread out, super uncertain. Cooper, Price, Williams, Cross, they all play a lot. You got Horton at tight end who plays a decent bit as well. Like, it's just really a mess after that. There's games where, like, all of them have caught multiple passes. It's just insane how many different guys they use at a low volume. So I'm just not really all that interested in the Indiana receivers other than Surratt. On the Michigan State side, Aiden Childs is their quarterback at $5,000. It's hard to get excited about him. Just in Big Ten play, the best game he's had has been 18 DraftKings points against Iowa. And I don't know. This Indiana defense looks pretty good, y'all. So I'm just not really feeling it at $5,000 for Aiden Childs. I would rather play one of the super cheap guys that we don't really know much about at 4,500 and hope that those guys have more upside than Aiden Childs does at 5,000. Running back, still a committee between Nathan Carter and Katron Lynch-Adams. You're not missing much. Wide receiver Nick Marsh had another big game against Michigan. He's the only receiver that I really want to target in this one. Last game of the day, we've got Oregon heading to Ann Arbor to take on Michigan. And as bad as Michigan's been, I think this is a trap game for Oregon. These cross-country road trips have not been kind in the Big Ten this year. Michigan is a team that is still very talented, regardless of their struggles this season. So I'm kind of very wary of Oregon in this spot. Oregon is 14.5-point favorites with a game total of 45.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 30-16 in favor of Oregon. To me, this is the toughest defense Oregon has played yet. Michigan is also going to slow the game down. That's just what they do. They're one of the highest rush rates in the country. They play at a slow tempo. So the Oregon offense is not only going up against a good defense, but they're not going to be able to have the same play volume that they normally have because the tempo being slowed down. So Dylan Gabriel, I've honestly faded him most of the season, and I honestly haven't really regretted it because there hasn't been a time where he's like absolutely broke the slate. There's been good performances, but there hasn't been any where you just like had to have him. And at $9,100 going up against this Michigan defense, I'm probably going to full fade him again. I just don't really see a pathway to him scoring like 30 plus DraftKings points in this game environment. At the running back spot, I love Jordan James. I loved him last week, but I just don't think this is a great spot for him. Like, Michigan's a really good run defense. He is splitting carries with Noah Whittington a little bit more. That could just be to kind of save Jordan James's legs, though. But Whittington has scored touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. So I'm really just not interested in either of them, if I'm being honest. Whittington maybe is like a GPP dart throw, but like, it's really hard to get excited about a running back going up against this Michigan team. And then at receiver, my only real thoughts are that Evan Stewart is still way too cheap. Remember the start of like best ball draft season where Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart were going like near back to back? And, they're still the same guys. Yes, Johnson has been significantly more productive, but there's no reason that Stewart should be $3,000 less, especially when you consider that Will Johnson is likely to be shadowing Tez Johnson in this one. So I do think that this is a pretty good spot for Evan Stewart at $4,400. On the Michigan side, they are back to starting Davis Warren at quarterback because Jack Tuttle has officially retired from football. So now it's a two-way battle between just Davis Warren and Alex Orji. And the problem is with Davis Warren is that against Michigan State, I thought he actually played pretty well. But then when he got in the red zone, they brought in Alex Orji just to run the ball, and Alex Orji vultured a touchdown from him. So really the crazy thing here is, like, even though Warren's the starter, he still doesn't have full starter upside. I don't think you can play either of them. Warren's going to be the starter, but Orji's going to come in packages, and that just has me have no interest between the two of them. What I do have interest in is Donovan Edwards. Why? Because there was a little bit of a kerfuffle, or a skirmish, or a ballyhoo, or a brouhaha, whatever you want to call it. There was a dust-up between Michigan and Michigan State after the game last week. Khalil Mullings was in the middle of it. Khalil Mullings could be suspended for this game. We don't know yet. If Mullings is suspended, Donovan Edwards at $4,700 is the running back value play of the slate because he has been embroiled in a committee that's been about 60-40 in favor of Mullings. And if it's just Edwards, it's going to be like 100-0 in favor of Edwards. And at $4,700, this is an absolute smash spot. I think he becomes one of the best running back plays on the slate if Mullings is out. If Mullings is in, I don't have any desire to play either of these two guys in a committee going up against the Oregon defense. Colston Loveland at tight end is really the only Michigan pass catcher I think you consider. He's still too cheap. 15 DraftKings points in 3 straight games, scored 3 touchdowns over that span. He's the only guy they really look to throw to, especially in the red zone. So $4,800, I do think he's way too cheap. And I think you could talk yourself into this game going over that total of 45 and Colston Loveland scoring multiple touchdowns. All right, that's going to do it for this episode, though, y'all. Went a little bit longer on time than I have in the past weeks, but that's okay. We got all 12 games broken down. Hopefully, we gave you guys all the information you need in order to build some successful DraftKings and FanDuel lineups for this salary. This video helps you out in any way, please hit the like button on YouTube. Please rate and review the audio. It helps me out a ton when you guys do that, and I really do appreciate it. But that's going to do it for this episode, y'all. Make sure you're subscribed. That way you can be with us for all of the rest of the college football slates, all the college basketball content as well. And, we'll be back for the night slate later this week. We'll be back for next week's main slate and hopefully some of the midweek slates as well. But that's all we got for this episode, guys. I very appreciate you guys, watching and listening to this point. Thank you guys for doing that. Best of luck to you guys in DFS this week. On this Saturday main slate, let it be a good one. But yeah, that's going to do it for me, guys. I'm out. See you guys next time.